progress.
Good evening. Welcome to the General Plan Subcommittee meeting on August 18th. If we could, I'll call the meeting to order. If we could have a roll call, Mary, please.
Yes. Chair Robinson?
Here.
Vice Chair, excuse me, 1 second. Step together. Vice Chair Wolnick?
I'm here.
Commissioner Bonilla?
Here.
Subcommittee Member Bonilla. Subcommittee Member Nugent?
Here.
And Subcommittee Member Rodriguez?
Here.
And I believe a member Patel is going to be absent, correct?
Yes, excuse me. Subcommittee Member Patel is absent, which is different what is on the printed agenda, but she is excused absent.
Yep, very good. If everybody would join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
Can we pause for just a second? We're having a problem with our video.
Okay.
And is there going to be no member Lee tonight?
I'm sorry?
Amarantz Lee, no member. She won't be here tonight.
She's not a member.
Ken,
you're right.
Ken Chin.
Ken Chin.
Yes.
Yeah, I thought Ken was going to be here.
Yeah.
I know, I love it. But I like the other side. It's like, when we had our last meeting here, I had a sustainability commission meeting.
Excuse me, Chair Robbins, we can go ahead.
Okay, it was pointed also that a member, Ken Chin, is absent, presumably with permission.
Yes.
Great. All right. Join me in the pledge, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And I'd like to take a moment to mention this is a hybrid meeting so that participation can be either in person, though we do not have a large crowd tonight, or online or on the telephone. And on the agenda, there's instructions. If you do wish to speak and you're here in the audience, there are yellow slips to fill out. If you are online, you would raise your hand at the appropriate time using that function, and we will bring you in when it's appropriate. If you're on the telephone, I always forget this and I have it lost here. There's to unmute, you press *6, and to participate, to raise your hand, you would hit *9, and then when you're told you're in, you would hit *6 to unmute. All right. Let's go on. First item of business is our only item tonight. It's new business. It's to discuss the draft general plan, GOPAs. Those are the goals, policies, and actions for 3 different elements: public services and facilities, safety, and noise. So I will turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Chair Robbins, members of the General Plan Subcommittee, Zach Dahl, Deputy Director with Community Development. I'm also joined remotely this evening by the city's General Plan Update Consultant, Joanna Jansen with PlaceWorks. So we'll be providing the presentation to you this evening. This is the second of a 3-part series of the subcommittee's meetings in August here, and this is focusing on the draft general plan's goals, policies, and actions for all elements within the general plan. And then we're going to share screen here in just a second and get rolling on our presentation. Excellent. So as we noted, this is our second in 3 meetings for the General Plan Subcommittee. And also we did want to note that we're presenting tonight, but we've got a large team that's supporting this effort, and we do always want to acknowledge all of the effort that goes into this undertaking, for whether it's the City of San Mateo's core team, the staff members throughout all city departments that make up the Technical Advisory Committee, and then our consultants with PlaceWorks, but also with PCRC and Good City Company, as well as the sub-consultants providing a variety of technical support. So for tonight's agenda discussion, we'll start with our presentation, then we'll go over what the next steps in the overall process are, look for any clarifying questions that the subcommittee may have, hear public comments, and then move into the GPS discussion. For tonight, we want to have our discussion focus on 3 elements, which is our public services and facilities element, our safety element, and our noise element. The goal is we'll have discussions on all elements over the course of these 3 meetings, so we want to focus the discussion on these 3 elements this evening. And so that would be the content of our presentation. We would encourage public commenters to focus on those as well, and then we would be looking to for the GPS to provide us input on the goals, policies, and actions for these 3 as part of 3 elements as part of your discussion. So briefly, and I know we've touched on this before, but just to give you a brief overview of what we've covered so far, this is our general plan vision statement and kind of forms the basis for which we then build our general plan. And then this is our schedule. Right now, we're at the beginning part of our draft goals, policies, and actions phase, which will run through the end of October of this year, and then transition into preparation and publication of our draft general plan and draft environmental impact report, with an ultimate target of bringing this back to council by the end of 2023 for something that could be adopted. And then obviously noting concurrently with this, but on a different timeline, is our housing element, which is on a slightly shorter timeline due to state requirements. So we want to note that we have functionally 8 elements within our general plan: land use, circulation, housing, which is on a separate track, community design and historic resources, conservation, open space and parks, public services and facilities, safety, and noise. And within those, we want to cover the full breadth of topics and areas of interest for the community, and areas that would be addressed in the coming 20 years over the course of city business and the community's interest. But the general plan does also include additional components. It includes the introduction, which is chapter 1. We also have appendices, glossary, and then an implementation plan, which really then outlines, once we have an adopted general plan, how do these goals, policies, and actions and the contents of the general plan ultimately get implemented. Also, we do want to note, since we are at in our next phase of community outreach and engagement, all of these meetings provide a forum for that. We're also working on various ways that we'll begin engaging directly with the community. We have 3 primary events, city-sponsored events. We have a virtual community workshop on September 8th, a Spanish language in-person workshop on September 10th, and then an in-person open house at the downtown library on September 17th. And then concurrently with that, we'll be going to the Planning Commission over 2 meetings in September, and then going to Council in October. Interspersed without that, we'll also be having a staff and general plan team presence at a variety of community events. We're also looking to engage with local groups to provide presentations and provide forums to talk through and collect input on the general plan. So really, between now and the beginning of October, we're looking to engage with the community and collect input and have that discussion in as many forums as possible. And you can always check our website, strivesanmateo.org, for up-to-date information on where these events will be occurring and ways that you can engage with us. That also does include an online survey that we can collect input on, and we always have our general plan email, and you can reach out to the team as well for direct conversations. And then also just a brief roadmap of the remaining meetings that the General Plan Subcommittee will be hosting between now and the end of the General Plan process. We have 1 more left in this series. We will have 3 more meetings for the draft general plan next summer, and then 1 final meeting in late fall to review the final general plan that will move forward for adoption. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Joanna with PlaceWorks, and then she will walk through the draft goals, policies, and actions for the three elements that we are discussing this evening.
Great. Thank you, Zach. Good evening, everybody. I'm Joanna from PlaceWorks. Thank you for allowing me to join you virtually this evening. We talked a little bit at our last meeting last week about goals, policies, and actions, and we wanted to just review some of that and also provide a little bit more context. Zach showed you a list of the general plan elements, and goals, policies, and actions are a very important part of those elements, but they're only one part. So we wanted to make sure that you are aware that each element will include more than just the goals, policies, and actions. It's also going to include some background information in a narrative form, as well as maps and photos and illustrations that pertain to the topics in that element. And then, of course, the goals, which are supported by both policies and actions. So just to provide a little bit more on the background information in each element, this on the right is just a kind of screenshot from your existing general plan as an example. This is going to be considerably updated and reformatted, but wanted to show you a little bit specifically what we're talking about to provide some context for the goals and policies, some of the kind of why to support the what and how of those policies. The background text will provide data and information and other details that are relevant to the topic for each goal. And we want to really keep these sections succinct. We have generated pretty voluminous background information already through the general plan process. This is not intended to be an encyclopedic reference, but rather to be more big picture, kind of timeless or enduring information to help readers understand why the general plan contains the goals and policies that it does without going into exhaustive detail or providing too much data that will soon become out of date. We really do want this to be a long-term plan, but it's important to help readers orient themselves to the goals and policies. And so many of the ideas and suggestions that we heard from you last week may find a home in the narrative, in addition to implying some potential changes to the policies and actions. So we talked about this a little bit last week, but just a refresher. A goal describes the desired result that the city is hoping to achieve through the general plan. The policy is a regulation that regulates and guides decision-making and directs the city's efforts. And an action is a measure or a procedure or a specific activity, something that staff and or others will do to help reach the goal or to implement a policy. To create the draft goals, policies, and actions that you're reviewing tonight, we started by taking a careful look at the general plan, goals, policies, and actions that are adopted today and reviewing those with staff from all departments. We then added new content based on new state requirements. And right now we're in the phase of revising, refining, and improving those goals, policies, and actions based on input from the community, from this subcommittee, from the Planning Commission, and ultimately from the City Council. We'll use that to prepare updated goals, policies, and actions that will then be included in the draft general plan. And as Zach said, that draft plan itself will then undergo another round of extensive community and decision maker review. So tonight we're asking you to provide your comments by element on the three elements of public services and facilities, safety, and noise. We have the same discussion questions to help spark that discussion that we talked about last week. You might tell us if there's things that you support in these goals, policies, and actions, what you would add or change, whether or not there are policy topics that are missing, whether or not there's opportunities that you see to change the policy wording to make it more firm requirement or relax it to more of a recommendation, and any specific actions you might recommend to support implementation. We're again offering an email address for subcommittee members or members of the public who see more detailed and specific typographic or grammatical changes you would like, generalplan@cityofsanmateo.org. So with that orientation to the goals, policies, and actions, I just want to briefly run through some of the topics in each element. Public services and facilities starts with services that are related to community safety. So that includes police and fire, as well as emergency readiness and code enforcement. One addition that we're making this week to the presentation is the little sidebar that you see here that just denotes other important agencies or plans or efforts that are related to either the city or the general plan, but happen outside of it. So that might include agencies that are not necessarily part of the city. It might include other plans that are not city plans. So when we talk about things like services, safety, and infrastructure, like we're going to be talking about tonight, it's very important to recognize the partnerships and collaborations that affect the city's provision of those services. The public services and facilities element also addresses water supply. That includes identifying water sources, water conservation and efficiency, recycled water, and ways to reduce San Mateo's use of water. Again, on the right, you can just see that San Mateo is not its own water provider. We do get our water from outside agencies. And so this is in particular a topic where understanding that set of relationships is very important, and a great example of the kind of thing where additional information is going to be included in the draft element to help the reader understand that context. Sewer and storm drainage policies and actions address things like planning ahead for an adequate sewer system and reducing sewer overflow, the wastewater treatment plant and its operations and capacities, interagency coordination, creek alteration for storm drainage, and city infrastructure studies and master plan. We also have kind of some dig once policies in here. I know that's a topic of interest to the subcommittee. This element is supplemented by a map of watersheds directly related to storm drainage flows. We also have some policies about broader public services and facilities, and especially making sure that these are equitably available to all members of the community. So that might include, this is the place where we address things like joint use, the operations and the facilities at City Hall and the library, as well as cultural and entertainment facilities, the courtyard, the events center, and the need for inclusive outreach. Public services and facilities includes a goal about children, youth, and schools. Obviously, we recognize that coordination with local school districts as well as private childcare providers is very important, and these policies get at that idea. We address healthcare and social services, including the San Mateo County Hospital and Mills Health Center, as well as social services and vulnerable populations and community healthcare facilities. The general plan also addresses solid waste in this element. So that includes both reducing how much solid waste we generate and making sure that as much as possible, solid waste is recycled or composted, and just a few policies about safety in waste collection. So that leads us to our second element for this evening, which is the safety element. We start off this element by talking overall about emergency readiness and emergency operations. So we have policies here about coordinating with the local hazard mitigation plan, locating critical facilities, emergency infrastructure and equipment for all types of emergencies or disasters, defensible design, response times, disaster recovery following an incident, evacuation, and again, inclusive outreach to make sure that all residents are informed of these topics in San Mateo. We also have a goal related to minimizing the threats and danger to life and property in San Mateo. And this is where we talk about mutual aid agreements, setting rebuilding priorities for the city, resilient power systems, again, outreach on public safety and training the community to also be prepared for disasters and responses. the emergency notification system, and related topics. Again, a map in this element shows locations of fire and police stations. And then we get into the section of the element that deals with individual types of hazards. This starts off with geotechnical hazards. So this includes things like landslides, liquefaction, earthquakes, and seismic ground shaking, seismic upgrades, and related topics. And a map showing slope stability and liquefaction potential, as well as shaking amplification during earthquakes. The next hazard that we address in the safety element is about flood hazards, including development within floodplains, connections to the city's floodplain ordinance, how we are going to handle and update flood risk mapping data and the community rating system that's established by the federal government, and early flood warning. This map shows potential flood hazards in San Mateo. And this map shows potential dam and levee failure areas that would be affected. In addition to surface water flooding, we also have a section on sea level rise and a goal about developing regionally coordinated sea level rise adaptation measures. I think we understand and certainly have heard throughout this process that sea level rise is not the kind of thing that can be addressed by any individual jurisdiction working alone. This is about planning for and protecting San Mateo from sea level rise, including groundwater rise triggered by sea level rise, how to use natural infrastructure as part of the solution, coordinating with One Shoreline, which is a regional working group on this topic, how to collect and monitor sea level rise data, and coordinate again on both sea level rise and rising groundwater. This map shows projected sea level rise in San Mateo. And again, this is taken from the Adapting to Rising Tides program that we have here in the Bay Area. Wildfire hazards are another topic of significant concern, I think, throughout California, including here in San Mateo. And this goal includes policies and actions about the wildland-urban interface, hillside vegetation, how we map and track fire risk, what infrastructure we provide for firefighting, including peak load water supply and other facilities, how land use can play a role in mitigating fire risks, policies and actions about tree trimming, fire safe education, and documenting fire hazard history in San Mateo. This map shows very high fire hazard zones as adopted by the city based on CAL FIRE data and current brush clearing areas in yellow. The safety element also addresses hazardous materials, including how hazardous materials are transported, where hazardous waste facilities are located, how they're designed, how the city treats contaminated sites, and related policies and actions. And the safety element is also where we address the city's energy supply. So the goal is to develop a clean energy supply with state-of-the-art technology and telecommunications facilities. So under this goal, we have policies about clean energy, building electrification, energy resilience, the access and availability of clean energy and clean fuel infrastructure, and policies supporting utility undergrounding. And then finally, our third element that we're discussing tonight is the noise element. This is really about protecting noise-sensitive land uses from excessive noise levels and how we are going to set and observe both interior and exterior noise level standards so that when the city is reviewing and considering new development, we are mindful of the noise environment in which that development is occurring, and we incorporate appropriate mitigation and design into the project so that the noise environment in the new development is healthy and compatible. There's also a goal about minimizing unnecessary, annoying, or unhealthful noise that might come from commercial uses, traffic, railroads, construction. And so the policies in this section address that. I do want to note that the noise ordinance in the San Mateo Municipal Code has a very important role to play in addressing and mitigating noise in San Mateo. So really, as you can see from the list of topics here, the noise element is more about addressing noise or noise conflicts that might occur between different land uses and planning land use with attention to the noise environment, as opposed to day-to-day kind of difficulties that we might have with our neighbors who are having a loud party or similar kinds of things. Those tend to be more addressed in the noise element than they will be in the general plan. So that's just a brief overview of the topics and the content in each one of the elements that we're focusing on tonight. Again, public services and facilities, safety and noise. I wanted to show you these questions one more time in case that helps to spark any conversation for you. And with that, we are ready for your clarifying questions.
Thank you very much. And the plan for this evening, if the subcommittee will indulge me, is to do somewhat like we did the last one, which is we'll have questions first, try and keep it to questions. They sometimes morph into comments, but let's try and keep it to questions. Then we'll go to the public for any comment, and then come back and maybe run through comments, but try and do it quickly so that we can then have more of an open discussion. I think that worked well last time, as opposed to just siloed into comments. So I'll start out with questions. Adam, I'll start at your end.
Sure, I have two questions. One was just a follow-up to the very last section that you had on noise. I just want to make sure I heard the right thing. So, day to day, instances of, loud noise, say like a car or something, that would be noise ordinances, not the noise section in the general plan. Is that correct? Is that what you were saying?
I'll jump in and then Joanna definitely follow up. Traffic noise would be covered here, and this is more looking to set thresholds for what are acceptable or unacceptable levels. The noise ordinance is more specific point source action. So say you've got, like Joanna mentioned, a loud party, or maybe you've got a piece of stationary mechanical equipment. That would be regulated through the noise ordinance, but setting the overall thresholds that could then go into the noise ordinance would come from the general plan.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. And then the other one is just procedural. Do you want to break this up? For the question for the chair, do you want to break it up by section, by the 3 sections, and then go through each section one by one, and just so we're not like
well, it doesn't make sense to do that with the public per se. If people feel strongly about it, we can do that. I don't have, for my own comments, I don't feel a need to split them up, but do people feel that would be beneficial? Not particularly, so okay. I think consensus is we'll keep them together, even though they do have some differentiation.
Sounds good.
Okay,
that's
okay.
it.
Good.
Thank you.
Thanks. Heather, questions?
Yes. I'm not sure what kind of question this is, but there was a couple from what we read last week and this week. There's a couple of policies that start with continue to, and I just wanted to ask if there was some deliberate thought as to which ones have continue to and which ones don't.
Generally, that term is used when this is an ongoing initiative. It's not necessarily new or something that the city hasn't started, because we want to acknowledge that we're already working on this effort in one form or another. And so the goal would be that we want to highlight that as something that we want to make sure continues into this upcoming general plan cycle.
Okay.
But if there's a specific policy or action, we're happy to weigh in on that in more detail.
Okay. And then my second question is about the event center. I know it's county owned, so the only one in here I saw was like encourage. Is that all we can do, or are they subject to our zoning code and all of that as well?
They're subject to consistency with our general plan, but because of the nature of their agency, a lot of city-specific regulations aren't necessarily applicable to county facilities.
Okay, thank you. That's it for me.
Thank you. Eric?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I have one question. It's kind of a specific question, but then I guess it applies to maybe how this is laid out. And I know that these documents cover a wide range of areas, so you got to keep it concise. But when you were going over the railroad noise, for example, there's like one sentence there, and that area is one of many areas that I think are extremely important to a lot of residents. And I'm just wondering how specific do we get in this document where we're not just talking about installation of noise barriers and other mitigations, but also making it a pretty big priority to deal with this noise problem that the majority of San Mateo residents live with every night. And so I guess is this sentence capture all the things that all the priorities and all the stuff that council has kind of invested in this, or is it the type of thing where we want to try to keep it kind of vague to save space?
I think this could grow and expand based on the committee's feedback, as well as Planning Commission and Council. So if there's additional detail to make sure that this is fully covered, we can definitely expand in this area. So I think it's a starting place, but definitely if there's more to cover or more specificity, whether that's in a policy or an action to support the goal, or if you feel it's important where there should be an individual goal that addresses how the city thinks about this and moves forward with it, those are all items that I think should be weighed in on and discussed, both here and then moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, I had one other question while you were talking, but I forgot. If I remember, I'll come back to me. But.
Okay, Rick?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. A couple of questions. Regarding the noise thresholds, which we just spoke about, are we actually currently within our noise thresholds?
As far as we know, or that's the goal, to make sure that as assigned within those thresholds, that those uses, those activities operate within them, and then the noise ordinance gets more specific about how you could address that. And I mean, there's different ways to work through remediating if we have situations where we're not in compliance.
Right. Well, I realize mitigating, if we go beyond the thresholds, can be a really big deal. But how do we monitor? When do we monitor? How often do we monitor?
I think it depends on what we're talking about here. Are we talking about, say, the noise from Highway 101? Are we talking about railroad noise? Are we talking about point source noise from, say, a specific construction activity or a piece of stationary equipment? So I think it varies depending on what type of noise generation we're talking about.
Actually, I'm thinking about just the ambient noise level overall. During the day, like I noticed that at 7 o'clock in the morning there's a roar, but when I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's perfectly silent outside. I sleep with my window open right next to me, right? And there's a big difference, and I wonder, does that roar, the general ambient sound level, right? Does that, I know that distance away from those generators can make a difference, and I guess I'd like to know more about that. Maybe we don't need to talk about all that right now, but I'd like to know more about that. So that's just one thing I had to ask about. I was wondering about the relationship between what we talk about in the general plan in terms of water use and conserving water and different, looking for sources of recycled water and different things like that. What's the relationship between what the general plan says about water and water use and conservation and the climate action plan, which I believe should also have something about water use and conservation in it?
Definitely. Well, the goal is that they're fully aligned, and so everything starts with the general plan. And so once we have an updated general plan, the goal would be that as we adopt or amend our climate action plan, it's consistent with the general plan, and that could mean that we need to come back with subsequent amendments to the general plan. But the goal is they should be in alignment. As noted, with water, there's certain limitations the city has because we aren't our own water provider. We have two different third-party, we have Cal Water and we have Estero that provide the city with water. So in some cases, we have limited ability to influence that. But then obviously with, say, production and distribution of wastewater or water conservation or how we manage the built environment for water efficiency, those are all things that we have more direct control over.
Yeah, and the built environment is what I'm thinking about for water efficiency. So I'm going to talk more about that later. Thank you. That's my questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Eric, do you come up with your other before I toss one or two out?
Yes, I did. Thank you, Chair. You maybe discussed this in the previous meeting, and so my apologies if you did, but when you were going about updating this from the previous one, did you start with the previous one as kind of like the baseline and then kind of for each element kind of update it as need be? Is that kind of how this came about, or was this written from scratch?
No, we did start with the current general plan that the city has, and then both through ongoing community engagement, we used feedback there to guide maybe how some of these evolved or whether they stayed in or were not retained. And then those that were moving forward, we updated them in various ways to ensure they're consistent or reflected changing conditions from the last time they were drafted or prepared.
And the reason for my question is, and I think this is kind of got to what I was talking about before with the railroad noise, and this is a little bit a little bit also too with the word choice with like encourage and continue to and things like that, because like support the installation of noise barriers is kind of different than actively seek or take the stronger language. And I'm just curious, when you were choosing the words, was it kind of like boilerplate, or were you making a conscious effort on like kind of what degree you chose the wording for these different sections?
Well, and Joanna, definitely weigh in, because I know I've been with the general plan effort for a little over a year now. But the goal was to be consistent with or aligned with community input, decision maker input, and where the language was. But I think that's a very good discussion topic for this group, for the community, and then ultimately for council is it at the right level, or does it need to be stronger? Or is it too strong? Because there are legal ramifications depending on the level if we say require versus encourage.
And then I guess the follow-up question is, does it really matter? Like with these word choices, and if we debate them, does it have any practical benefit or not, or are we just splitting hairs?
We do have an obligation to be consistent with and support our general plan, and so language does matter. And if we're making decisions that are inconsistent with the general plan, there's ramifications to that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have one other question. Regarding what Eric just brought up, would it be true that there are some areas where we really don't have jurisdiction and we don't really have the ability to do more than, say, we encourage or we support?
That would be a good example when we're say maybe we're encouraging the use of new water sources, but maybe we're not the one that's actually procuring the water. We actually legally couldn't do more than encourage or maybe support another agency in that endeavor. Right. So sometimes that language is driven by, what we're looking to regulate or influence.
Okay, thanks.
Did you have another question, Heather?
I did.
Okay.
And feel free to tell me this is too specific. We can do it later. But there was one goal that I just didn't understand at all, or one policy, and that was the PSP 5.2, school site reuse or redevelopment. I think I read it about 5 times and still didn't really get what that policy was for.
Let me see, I'm trying to track down that specific policy. You said...
It's on page PS5, which would be, I think, 75 in the whole packet.
So this is a school site reuse and redevelopment?
Yes, yeah.
Maybe, Joanna, I don't know if you have any more background or if this is a policy that was carried over from our current general plan.
Would it be helpful to show it on the screen, or would you prefer not?
Yeah, let me pull that up.
Oh, I have it if you want me to share my screen. That was an offer rather than a,
Yeah, if you're able to pull it up.
okay. Yeah, let me go to that. Okay. We're going to be looking at it in a Word. So you'll see that. So this is the policy that's in question. This is the kernel, at least, of this policy I know is carried over from the existing general plan. And it's kind of at a similar level of detail, and I'd have to open that in a separate file to be able to compare kind of the original wording. So this is about, is there a specific question about the policy or just kind of overall desire for an orientation here?
I think overall, I'm not understanding how this one kind of plays out.
Okay. All right. So this is just to kind of situate us here. This is under the first goal about children, youth, and schools, which is about fostering the healthy development and education of children of all abilities. And so this is where we have policies about supporting public education as well as childcare in San Mateo. You know, as you're probably aware that the relationship in terms of land use between the city and the school district is somewhat complex, but this policy is really stating that when the school district declares that there are surplus public school sites, the city wants those, any way that those are reused or redeveloped for non-school purposes, to be compatible with surrounding land uses. So part of that would be establishing appropriate residential densities, given the need for housing in San Mateo, and prioritizing affordable housing and community recreation needs for the reuse of school sites, since both of those are things that the city has identified as you know, things that we need to find space for. And then the last piece of this about retaining public recreation facilities, consider allowing density transfers from the portion of the site retained in public recreation use means if, you know, if we had a 10-acre site and we decided that we were going to use 5 acres of that for recreation, we would still want to be able to take advantage of the full amount of density that would be allowed on the 10-acre site. So we would transfer the allowed density from the 5 acres rather than just not losing that development capacity at all. We would transfer that density to the developed portion of the site. And that the cost, the revenue from that development would then help to, in part, to offset the cost of providing additional recreation facilities in the city, while also ensuring that the city is able to achieve the maximum amount of housing.
Okay, so if I'm understanding what you're saying, if there is a site that's going to be developed for something other than a school, we want it to be housing first with the compatible density, and then if there's already a recreational use on the school site, then we do this potential retention of some recreation use, and then the rest can be a higher density for the smaller plot. Am I understanding that correctly?
The current wording would be to give first priority and consideration to affordable housing and community recreation needs. So we know that both of these are things that San Mateo needs. The policy as it's worded doesn't say anything about the existing uses on the site. So regardless of what the site is or how it's being currently used, if we have the opportunity to take what, you know, many times with surplus public school sites is a relatively large area, this policy is saying that the city is going to prioritize both affordable housing and community recreation on that site.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
All right. I had 2 questions. One's been taken, but they're both on the page prior. I will mention on the question that I don't have anymore has to do with the event center, but that is a place where the word promote is probably appropriate because our authority there is somewhat limited, but we can nudge and push. Up above, it's policy PS-P4.3, which entitled City Hall. And I wanted to ask staff and take advantage of having the mayor and another council member here. Is there an actual need? I know, years ago there was talk about a need to upgrade and expand City Hall and possibly establish a downtown facility. But my question is just, is that a perceived need now, between now and 2040?
Yes, and part of that is fed by the desire. We do have other leases where city staff is operating, so it's it's being able to wind up those leases and then provide for our staff. And obviously, there's changing dynamics there with the ability to work remotely. But when we're talking about the city staff, there is a need to ensure that we're providing appropriate community service levels where maybe it can't always be met remotely. And so the goal with this is to look at how we can meet those needs within our current facilities to alleviate the need to rent or lease other office spaces.
Okay, but slipping into comment here a little bit, I understand they need to upgrade. I'm not sure I'm convinced that there's a need to expand or establish a separate facility. I mean, those are significant capital costs that, obviously just because it's in the plan doesn't mean we have to do it, but I'm just wondering whether it is something that would be a priority or a need to, Rick, as the mayor, do you have a sense?
As far as I know, it's not any sort of a priority. There have been ideas discussed in the past. We used to have City Hall downtown. City Hall is now perceived as kind of distant from downtown in the core of business and things that go on from day to day. Additionally, this particular property is kind of large, and our footprint here is spread out, and we're in a residential area. This property could maybe be better used in some way, and we could have on a smaller footprint downtown, possibly. I'm just relaying discussions I've heard, in the past. A smaller footprint, maybe something with multiple floors, a civic center, a city hall type of setting downtown. There are some properties that come available from time to time. It would be expensive. Where we will get the money, I'm not sure, but different things become possible at different times. So that's all the background I know on that.
Okay. Eric, what do you want to?
My 2 cents, and I think getting at what you said, is it a nice to have or is it like a must have? And in my opinion, I haven't heard anything in discussions that this is like a must have. But what I do think is kind of interesting is if as our city plans on growing, and if we're going to be believing that these numbers on how our population is going to grow, well, our city hall and city staff is going to have to kind of at least grow, somewhat proportionally to that. So that's just kind of how I'm thinking about it. But I haven't heard like, oh yeah, we got to start stowing away because this place is completely inadequate. I haven't heard that at all.
Thanks. I'll defer to comments, follow my own rule, a response on those things. I think we're ready to go to public comment. I see nobody in the hall, so I assume we have no yellow slips. Nobody with a yellow slip anyway. Is that true, Mary?
That is true. There is no in-person public comments, and we'll give those via Zoom just a second.
Okay, yeah, those who are Zooming, please use the raise hand feature if you'd like to participate.
Chair Robbins, there doesn't look like there's any public commenters at this time.
Okay, same on the phone. We would know that through the Zoom, I guess.
We would.
Okay, well, our popularity is a little thin this evening, but I'll bring it back to for comments. Do people want to take a break at all, or we're good? We're on a roll. Okay, at some point we will need to. I will need to. Let's start comments. I'll start at the other end. Rick?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. In my review of all of the documentation that was presented for tonight, I found a lot of it very straightforward. Actually, I believe that actions that we're taking to kind of bring it up to date were very effective. I think that in general, what we're looking at is pretty squarely adjusted with modern standards for a city our size and in our location, taking into account flooding possible from sea level rise, possible from dam breaks, taking into account fire hazards. I mean, all the important things we need to look at. And of course, the giant elephant in the room, you know, which a lot of these things, except for seismic hazards, we're looking at is climate change. So I think we need to make sure somehow that climate change is featured prominently in the general plan, and that all aspects of different situations that can come about as a result of climate change, which is why I raised the question about water and the climate action plan, because I know that recently we've been talking about electrification. We have Peninsula Clean Energy. We have goals to reduce carbon emissions. We're looking at possibly eliminating the use of and if I have my way, we will eliminate the use of natural gas in the city. But I'm wondering, one of the other effects of climate change is drought and lack of fresh water. And we're talking about possibly working with Cal Water to see if we can somehow develop a source through our wastewater treatment plant of recycled water or any other possible sources of water we could find, and be able to provide those maybe through separate plumbing systems, or perhaps the recycled water could be treated to a potable level, which I know is possible. So all these things are questions. But one of my questions is, once the water reaches the house, how do we make sure the house or any building that is an older building, an existing building, is water efficient? Should we have some regulations calling for water efficiency? And how we would enforce that, I have no idea, but I think maybe the same way we're looking at with electrification, which is when permits are taken and or new appliances are bought, different things like that. I mean, one of my ideas is that we should have a disclosure that's posted at places that sell appliances that use natural gas, or appliances maybe that aren't exactly energy efficient. If you go to Home Depot, you can buy toilets that comply with the law, but they don't all go down to the lowest possible. I have a toilet that uses 0.8 gallons per flush, and that's lower than what the state requires right now. But I think we might want to think about these things, saying that we need to be in compliance. So we want to bring the older houses, which have some toilets that use 5 gallons per flush, somehow into compliance at some point, because that would be a great saver of water, just for one thing to talk about and think about. So I think it's a larger subject than toilets, but that's what I was thinking about. Additionally, on page 68, it's P3.3. It talks about sanitary sewer overflows, and I think it says they can flow into
Do you want me to pull it up?
Sure, you can, please.
What was the, which policy was that?
PS 3.3, no, PSP 3.3. Page 68 in the document at the top.
PS 3.3?
So yeah, right there, the top one, sewer overflow reduction. So it says that the water quality of the city's creeks, lagoons, and bay, because we have bay frontage, and sanitary sewer overflows also affect water quality in the bay. They go to the creek, to the lagoon, to the bay. So could we put, instead of and, a comma, and after lagoons, say and bay? Is that possible?
That's definitely possible.
Yeah, okay. Also, I was thinking about, I saw on your slide number 39, talk about peak load water supply, which I also saw somewhere in the document. And I think that's also related to water conservation, because it's all the same water. Cal Water, you know, it's the same. They just have larger pipes there for fire hydrants, and they just provide more water. But I was wondering about that. When we talk about peak load water supply, what does that really mean? Do we know?
I believe that's a reference to when you're fighting a wildfire and you have an increased load pulling from your water system, what that would be. But Joanna, is that correct?
Yeah, or a structural fire.
I'm sorry?
Or basically, if there's an event such as a structure fire or a wildfire, and you have that increased demand for water to fight that fire, that's what that peak load would be looking at.
So it means we're going to have sufficient water to meet that peak load of water supply to fight fire with, right? Is that?
Yes, that's what that's in reference to.
Okay. So water conservation is important in order to enable us to have peak load water supply, right?
That would speak more to the capacity of the system, a sufficient storage facility. So when you have that increased need for water to fight a fire, it's there. I mean, if you just have one, you may not have the pressure you need or the volume needed in a short period.
So it's more maintaining the infrastructure that allows us to fight fires in an optimal way.
Yes, that's what this particular policy is getting at.
I see Joanna nodding her head. Yeah, go ahead.
It's really, as I mentioned in the policy, it's about the pressure. So this can be a problem in hilly areas, right? Getting the water uphill to be able to have sufficient pressure to fight the fire. So this is about maintaining that infrastructure or the storage facilities or whatever it is, so that when you turn on the fire hose, water comes out in a way that's going to put out the fire.
So which is why Cal Water maintains those big water tanks up on the hill so that there's water pressure up there. Does the city ever have anything to do with making sure that Cal Water has sufficient water for that? Is there some way they certify us that they're capable of fighting a fire, that they have provided adequate storage, pressure, everything else we need to be able to fight fires in those areas that we saw up on the hills that had the high fire danger?
Joanna, do you have thoughts? I know there's certain legal requirements that the water district is required to meet, but with regard to emergency response like that, does the city's role change?
I would expect that this is probably something that the San Mateo Consolidated Fire District monitors and tests, and would be part of the relationship between the water district and the fire district would be my guess.
So I'm wondering if we could actually look into that and find out if there is something that we should list to make sure this is something that's known and maintained, that there's some type of a monitoring of the capabilities of water for firefighting, especially in those high fire danger areas.
That can definitely be explored further, and that could be something that maybe takes is outlined in the narrative of the general plan, or if there's additional need in a policy or action, we can look to see where there's an opportunity there.
Great, thank you. That's kind of, I mean, other than that, like I say, I think that the document as it has been reviewed and updated looks good to me. It looks modern. I have to admit, when I looked at with relation to the school site reuse, I was a little curious, but I know what the density transfer would do, and that it would. And I think the real scenario is, if you have a school site, it's 10 acres, half of it is school and half of it is a field that the neighborhood uses for soccer or baseball. These existing uses are there. The neighborhood would like to retain those uses. The school is going away, and now the city has the ability to maybe work out a deal with the school district to have some reuse for this site. And what we're saying is that we would be able to find a way to allow the recreational uses to remain, and we take the density from those acres that are allowed, let's say just 10 units per acre, there's 5 acres, so you would take the other 5 acres already get 50 units, or 25 units, because there's 5 acres at 5 units. The other 25 units from the part that would become recreational facility go over there, so then we have 50 units altogether. And that's just, I think that's really smart. I don't know how likely it is we're going to see any unused school facilities, but we do have one actually already up on the hill off of Alameda. I guess that's a real possibility. Yeah. So thank you for asking that question. I appreciate that. Those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Eric, comments?
Thank you. I actually found this task quite challenging because, when I was reading the report and I'm reading over all the stuff that we're supposed to be covering, trying to figure out how am I going to add value to this discussion? What good questions do I have, and how can I just move it along and contribute? I agree with Rick's sentiments that, overall, I thought it was a great I thought it was a great document. I thought it was very clear. I thought it was very updated and modern. And it's the type of thing where I found myself, maybe wanting to change a word or here, or add a comment here or there, or a comma here or there. But for the most parts, I didn't really have any meaningful changes to it. And I think that I would like to think that a lot of that speaks to how thorough it was. I mean, it's kind of one of the things where you kind of it's hard to figure out what it's missing because there's just so much stuff there, and you're like, okay, yeah, well, I didn't know that was included and that was included. But I think for now, this one is pretty thorough. I think you guys did an outstanding job, and I wish I had more constructive things to add to it, but at this point, I don't. So.
I'm going to jump in and not go last for a change, if y'all don't mind. I don't have a lot, but I do have some comments down in the weeds a little bit. It is thorough, it's good doc, but I also, maybe it's because I'm a lawyer, but I feel a need to weigh in. The first one would be on the first page of element 7, it's PS P1.3 fire stations. Sort of consistent with my thought regarding City Hall, I would suggest adding an as needed where it says provide new stations and say as needed. I mean, we're a city with not much land. It would be infill. So whether we're adding new stations is unlikely, I think. We might be upgrading. So we talk about improvements and so forth already to existing stations, which makes perfect sense. But I would suggest an as needed in there in the middle of that section. And I'll jump on to the next page, actually. This is the recycled water at A2.1. It's an action, so it's an A, but it's in PS still, on PS page 2. Recycled water. I think it might behoove us to mention something. I don't have specific language, but I have specific comments. I think we ought to talk about gray water and potable water and reference our water treatment facility where we have ongoing measures to produce both those things, hopefully over time. And it might be that it would be, we already have Explore, the feasibility, but talking about just with Cal Water, I think there are things the city is doing and can do to provide perhaps incentives for the use of production of gray water and then use of it, and perhaps also to encourage gray water systems in residential and commercial buildings. So I think those would be concepts worth putting in. So that's that. Next page is, I promise I won't go every page. PS, it's P3.8, stormwater drainage system. I think we need to reference sewer laterals, which has been a huge issue for years here. That's where a lot of the leakage occurs in the system. And we've just encouraging sewer lateral maintenance and replacement, another encourage type word. But we have had, the city's had programs in the past to actually subsidize people's upgrades to the extent the pot of money was available. Is that program still in place? Do you know?
It's still in place, but it's not stormwater, it's sewer.
Sewer, yeah, sorry.
They half up to $5,000 for sewer lateral replacement.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and as an old public works guy, I should remember the difference. But that's a concept that needs to go in here. But you're right, it's not stormwater. It's sewer because it's coming out of the houses. Though it impacts the stormwater is the problem. Yeah, in part, yeah. Okay, next page. This is, we've already talked about the City Hall at P4.3. I would just maybe throw in the word consider. I'm not going to get into a fight on whether we really need an expanded City Hall or, I'd love to see one downtown. I just think that ship has sailed. But if we put in the word consider, we already have it in there in one place. I put it up at the beginning too. And then, okay, that's that. Next page, try and keep this quick. This is P5.3. These are policies regarding children and youth, and this is just underneath is the child care needs one, but actually drop down to child care centers at public and quasi-public facilities. It's a little more complicated than I think this policy states. As I understand it, a number of our current facilities, and they're under the Parks and Rec Department, can't really be utilized well for childcare because they can't be fully licensed because they don't have the right square footage and space. And so I think what we need to do is not just retain existing centers, but improve some and develop or develop additional public facilities and some language that allows, basically, we're going to probably need to shut down some of our existing ones and switch their uses, and then because they can't be upgraded to anything meaningful. If you're not licensed, you can't go beyond 4 days, and they get underutilized. And there's one of them that's right up against the lagoon. That's a nightmare for the kids in the water. So a little more expansion of P5.5 to allow that flexibility would be great. And I'm not going to give you specific language because y'all can wordsmith it. Now I jump all the way to energy supply now. So this is under safety. And there's energy resilience, which I think is P7.3. It's page S10 under safety. And I don't know if this is actually the right place for it or not, but it is something we've talked about at length. It may go under another element, but the idea not only of trying to develop and incorporate solar, but this I thought would probably be worth a mention of electric appliances, energy-saving appliances and devices. I just didn't see that anywhere, and that's been an active goal in our REACH codes and elsewhere. Not without controversy, but it's certainly an important area. And then lastly, this is another that I'm not 100% certain fits in this element, but a noise, our shortest element, but in policy P1.2, exterior noise level, I'm wondering, we talk a lot about trains and here, ambient noise and play areas and so forth. How about equipment? I just didn't see a reference anywhere here for the leaf blowers and all the other outdoor equipment, not just industrial when they're doing, a construction site, but just the day-to-day gardening and other items, which are really a source of great irritation to a lot of our citizens, in my experience. Those are my comments, and it looks like Rick wants to rebut me.
I just want to, rebut. I'm looking at the bottom of the page under policies, noise regulation right there. It says at the bottom of the page, regulate noise in San Mateo to prohibit noise that is annoying or injurious to neighbors of normal sensitivity. Maybe it should say something about, to specify exactly what the known irritants are, right? So
or just the nature of the equipment.
Noise,
it doesn't
right,
don't identify which model.
Because the negative impacts that come from the pollution that comes from those two-stroke engines is actually covered under air standards.
I will accept that friendly amendment from my brother, Rick. And those are all my comments. Thank you. That was to make Eric laugh. Heather, your turn.
Got a sticky button. I was in the same seat last week too. All right. Okay. So I will also get into the weeds just a little bit because this is my opportunity to do so. So starting with public services and infrastructure, P17. P17. So I don't have any issue with this particular policy, but it did strike me as odd that it was the only code enforcement policy there. And it just made me wonder if we're missing something. I don't have anything specific. I just raised that as a question to staff if there's anything else we're missing in code enforcement there. Moving to water conservation, P2.2. I would like to see stronger language here. This just says support local, regional, and statewide water conservation, and I think there's a lot more we can do as a city. So I'd like to see stronger language there. Let's see here. P3.3, sewer overflow reduction. It starts out with encourage efforts to help reduce. I would also like to see stronger language there. It seems kind of like we'll try to try, or we'll try to support people who are trying. So some stronger language there. Moving down to, so P3.6, coordinate infrastructure improvements. My comment doesn't actually belong here, but it triggered it for me. Do we want to have, I'm sure there have been discussions that I'm not aware of undergrounding utilities. And I don't know if that's something that we want to have a discussion about in this process. That might be something we would want to include somewhere in the general plan.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's there?
It's in another section, I think, but it is included for
Okay.
undergrounding. Yeah.
Okay, then I missed it. Maybe we can find it and I can read that section again. Under actions for 3.1, I'd like, so it says develop and update studies. I'd like to add the word coordinate. I think we have a lot of studies that seem to be siloed and and master plans that would be really nice to have them more cohesive. And then on the action 3.3, dig once, I wanted to just point out that in the policy P3.6, we mention bike and ped projects as something we want to do utilities, bike ped projects with our road maintenance projects. It's just not here in the action. I know dig once kind of more implies underground stuff, and maybe there's a little bit of that with separated bike lanes, but I just wanted to maybe be consistent there. Moving on to policy 4.9, the San Mateo County Event Center. I would like to see some language in here about encouraging green space or open space. We just talked about physical and aesthetic improvements, but I think that's a good spot. It's a big property. The school site reuse, P5.2, I think it could, I don't disagree with the policy now that it's been explained to me. I just think it's written in a very confusing way, and perhaps it could be edited so that it reads a little more simply. In the actions under policy 5, so A5, I have 3 and 4, but I think that's because I made up the numbers. Yeah, we don't, okay, so we have 2. I'd like to see something about develop licensed preschool facilities. I know Cliff mentioned that. I think that should be a big priority for the city. And I also wanted to think about the feasibility of providing before and after school programs, more extensively than we do, and working with the school district to help that. I think that's a big need for our residents. Policy 6.4, vulnerable populations. It mentions working with local religious institutions. I think we should add in nonprofits and community-based organizations. And then 2 other policies under the same goal to consider. Do we want something about encouraging healthcare facilities throughout the city so that they can be walkable and have access? I know there are things in here about really encouraging them to be in underserved community or communities that don't have them currently. And then I also had the thought about expanding mobile health opportunities. I think that's mostly by the county, but it might be something we can consider as a city as well. Let's see here. Okay, skipping down into the safety policy 1.7. Defensible design. I kind of took a little issue with some of these examples here. I think they're myths on what they create, on creating safety. So I'd kind of like to see something in here about talking about data-backed or proven design principles and sort of maybe removing some of those examples. Although I think lighting is a comfort, it hasn't really been shown to improve or lower crime, I should say. Okay, skipping down, let's see. So I was looking at policy 1.8 and action 110 together. It's talking about response times for, and the roadways, how we do our roadway improvements. And I don't really have an issue with, obviously we want to make sure that our emergency first responders can get to emergencies. But what it did I read these two kind of saying that it's sort of missing the other safety issue of road safety. I mean, if we keep designing huge, big roads that our fire trucks can, have extra space to get down, then we're missing the boat on some of the safety designing we can do to reduce traffic fatalities and incidences. Let's see. Okay, so on noise, moving down to noise, policy 1.2, exterior noise level standard. I guess this is more of a question. It talks about requiring these analyses, but it doesn't really say what happens with the analyses. I mean, if a park is too noisy, are we not going to build it? Or I guess I don't understand what we're asking for the analyses for.
The analysis would drive the design, and so we want to make sure that we're creating a new park or recreation facility that isn't going to expose those users to unnecessarily high noise levels. So most likely, if there's noise levels that are too high, you would look for ways to mitigate those, whether that's sound walls, berms. There's other ways to ensure that users wouldn't be exposed to noise levels that are unhealthy.
I see. So it's more the noise around an open space for the people that are in the open space. It's not a worry about people using the open space bothering neighbors. Is that right?
That's correct. That's how I would when you look at this, you're looking at exposure levels because you're creating a new use that will have people using that site. And so you want to make sure that you're not creating a facility that, say, is exposed if you're right next to a highway without proper mitigation. Any people using that over long terms could have negative health effects. So that's really the intent of when we're looking at exterior noise level standards.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And then traffic noise, P2.4. It references widening of 92 and 101. First question, can they get wider? And then I just heard this morning our District 4 Director of Caltrans was speaking about how they're basically deprioritizing widening. So I didn't know if we wanted to think about that with this particular comment that, we really, that they're not going to be looking to widening, and maybe we as a city should be not looking to making those roads any wider. And then along with this traffic noise one, I think there's maybe a mention of that traffic speeds also are a noise generator that we maybe should be looking to help reduce. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam?
Yeah, thank you, Heather. So when I first read through this, I thought to myself, boy, how do I even provide feedback on this? Because there's a lot of stuff that I would never claim to be an expert on. But I read through it a second time and did come up with some similar things that other people have said. So I'll just note if I'm seconding things. The first area that I wanted to touch on was the water supply section, which is goal PS2. And then specifically looking at actions under the water supply. So my understanding is that overall in California, water use is by humans is about 90% irrigation, most of that being for agriculture, but in urban areas, it's about 50% irrigation of plants. And so we already have, standard California set ordinances for water efficient landscaping for new projects, but I also think we should encourage existing homes to convert to more water efficient landscaping, because that's one of the biggest drivers of water use in the city. And so having some sort of incentives to do that, whether it's means of education or refunds or some other sort of thing that we can do, and maybe partnering with Cal Water to get that happening. But I think landscaping is a big area where water supply could be saved substantially. And so I think we would be remiss to not mention landscape specifically in our actions as part of the water reductions strategies. I'm gonna go down to the public services and facilities section. The only thing I wanted to note is I like that you have for goal PS4, the inclusion of equitable facilities as policy PS-P4.1 on the top. I'm very encouraged that that's included, and I want to just thank staff for having that. And then I'm going to go down to goal PS5. So, the school site reuse and redevelopment, I think of, the site over by College Park in my neighborhood, potentially what's going to happen with that. And I want to make sure that, the word compatible with surrounding land uses is fleshed out, so we understand what that means in this context. So it's not, so it can't be used as, so it's just clear to everybody so that we can have expectations set in this general plan for what that means. And then I completely agree with Cliff as far as improving existing centers for the child care and policy PS-P5.5. I think that would be very helpful to our population, where we can have actually child care in our so having some sort of incentive for park fees or whatever capital improvements we have, making that a priority. And then down at the actions for this, the child care and new construction, which is action PS-A5.2, I really want to stress non-residential uses, as the construction of residential is often, we have to be careful what we're balancing, with balancing that with, the request for subsidized affordable units and all that. So, looking to non-residential development, especially to help us get new childcare in new construction, I think is vital. So that to me seems the best way to emphasize it, where there is a little bit less fat on budgets often for residential. And then down to healthcare facility, or healthcare and social services. I just wanted to note, right here, it is, policy PS-P6.3, so the social services, it says support the provision of the city's fair share of social services and avoid the concentration of social services in any one neighborhood and seek dispersal throughout the city. yes, we want to make sure that we're being equitable about the supply of social services, but we also have an imbalance in our city currently, just with the resident population. So I live in North Central, and we have food handout and social services provision that, if we were to look at, we want to balance it out and put some in college in San Mateo Park, we want to make sure that it's meeting the needs of residents while also working towards a less concentrations of people in need of such social services in single neighborhoods. So that, I don't know how you nuance that, but I think it's just important that we balance the population and integration goals overall within our city. Didn't have anything for solid waste. Down to the safety element, I actually wanted to comment on the defensible design aspect too, similar to what Heather said. I think lighting, and making it comfortable for people to be outside does help in the sense of it can get more people on the street, and having more people out can make it safer. So that portion of just having additional people walking is important, and so that I don't want to get lost. But you're also right that it's important to have evidence-based priorities for what we do. And then likewise with the response times on the policy S-P1.8, I read through that and I thought exactly like Heather. A crash prevented is always preferable to crashes occurring, but with speedy emergency services getting to them. And so we really do need to balance this aspect of response times to not make our streets into giant highways where they shouldn't be. So we really need to look at speed and access and avoiding. Basically, we want to reduce conflicts in the roadway and automobile speeds in any areas that contain vulnerable users like pedestrians and bicyclists. And I say that, I live on Delaware, and, that's an emergency service. Vehicles go by there a lot. And, it's also heavy pedestrian. There's bus stops there. There's lots of users. There's lots of bicycles. It's just a busy street from all sorts of vulnerable users. And so, response times have to be paired with ensuring that the right-of-way is safe for everyone. And so just including some sort of balance to this consideration for the safety of people who can get hit by fast cars. So that's what I would have to say about that. And then down at the response time study, which is the action S-A1.10. So it's conduct a response time study to provide a data-driven understanding of how future roadway safety improvements could impact emergency response times, and use this information to adjust proposed roadway improvements as needed. I think it's also important that we do that with understanding and statement of our priorities, that we need to ensure that the safety of vulnerable road users take as high of a priority in adjudicating the roadway improvement decisions. So, it's different. Like for 70 years, we've been designing streets with the idea that, making them fast and wide was safe, and this just wasn't the case. And so we have to redo that understanding, and that includes just the minutia of some of these goals. Like, we just want to make sure there's no conflicts in the future, because I think that most people understand, who know, are somewhat familiar with it, that we need to make sure that people aren't hit by fast cars. And nobody likes fast cars outside of sometimes the driver. I don't have much to say about fire. I think it's great, very good. Hazardous materials, nothing, no comments. The next thing that I just wanted to mention that I had comments was energy supply, which is goal S7. And, I think about energy supply, and part of that, let's see, yeah, it's S7. Part of the big part, when you think about supply of energy, you also got to think about the demand part. And to me, I almost feel like we should have a second goal where we just, and this ties into our climate action plan, is to reduce per capita energy use. Because if we focus only on the supply, we're missing half of the puzzle. And so my suggestion is to add a goal somewhere along the lines of reduce per capita energy use. And then policies could include something like encourage energy use reduction by incentivizing active transportation and reducing single occupant vehicle use. Another policy could be encourage the creation of energy efficient homes, businesses, and other buildings. We're blessed for living in the climate that we have, but in pretty much everywhere else in the country, the first thing to do is to insulate and weather strip and make sure buildings are not just leaking heat and cooled air. Like, that's a huge thing that would save so much. You don't even need to redo the grid, the electrical grid. And so I think having that as a policy is really important in this context. And then, possible actions could be encourage energy use reduction through the creation of safe and comfortable opportunities for active transport modes by implementing the city pedestrian bicycle master plans and focusing new development near major transit nodes. So kind of just tie it into the rest of the general plan's goals. And then another action could be encourage the installation of code standard home insulation, weather sealing, and other physical means to reduce heating and cooling needs through greater Title 24 compliant building efficiency, something along those lines. And I think having that as like a pair to the energy supply, kind of brings everything together in that sense. And then scroll down to the noise element. I didn't have too much to say about this. I just agree with everything that's been said so far. And the questions, I had the same questions about noise too. But very good. Thank you.
Thanks. And just one response for Heather. Undergrounding, which was a big issue, by the way, in my neighborhood years ago and still is, percolates a little bit, pops up under safety energy supply, P7.4 and action A7.1. Anyway, for your edification, it is in there. Rick?
Yeah, I wanted to see if I could maybe kind of draw out one that was brought up. It's on page 71 of the document. I'm not sure exactly which, whatever. We were talking about supporting vulnerable populations by prioritize, or where we talked about using religions and nonprofit organizations. I think somebody brought up, right? So I wanted to question, because I hear the word vulnerable populations, vulnerable communities, I saw in another part, and we don't really seem to have vulnerable clearly defined, but I want to see if we can maybe try and address the causes of vulnerability somewhat. And the city's already done some of that by, in 2016, increasing the minimum wage, by what we've been talking about most recently, the council has about implementing some renter protection measures, right? So to reduce the vulnerabilities rather than just seek to treat them by providing nonprofits or religious organizations to provide free services or goods, right? Instead of treating the core cause of basically poverty in many cases. There are other kinds of vulnerabilities, but poverty is one of the big ones that we're commonly having to deal with. So I was wondering if in the P6.4, under that section, it's on page 71 of the document.
Community facilities?
Yes, community services, I think. It's P6.4. Yeah. Vulnerable populations. So maybe you could say something like support vulnerable populations by prioritizing reduction of vulnerabilities, which I think is pretty common sense, and then enlist nonprofits and religious groups to help. But I think that it's that reduction of the vulnerabilities that we really should be trying to focus on, rather than just saying, how do we just meet these needs?
Yeah, one term of art out there, I know from my Sam House work, is trying to reduce or stop generational poverty.
Exactly.
That's the concept.
Yes.
Yeah, because that
And it ain't easy.
young
but it's
people
important.
who grow up under those conditions quite often tend to live that way.
Yep.
And we need to change that. That we have to intervene. So, yeah. Okay, that was my thought on that. Thank you.
Keeping that in mind, we're at the discussion stage. I don't know that I'm not trying to force people to sit here and keep talking, but if anybody wants to bring up anything that's gone on and have a little free-form discussion. First off, does staff have any questions on anything we've said that you need some further clarification, or you're good and let us just chat?
So far, so good. Yeah, unless there's any specific questions that you want staff to elaborate on.
I'm thinking right now might be a good time for a 5-minute break.
I support that. I don't see snacks. Oh, there are snacks. Okay. 5-minute break, and then we'll come
Thank
back
you.
and chat for a little bit. So discussion, questions, comments, free form. I think this has been good, and we've got a lot of overall good statements and then some good detailed stuff that staff seems happy with having received. Anybody want to chime in with anything else? This could be a very long break we just took.
Yeah, I think this one's pretty straightforward. I think that might save our energy for next week.
We do have another meeting coming up pretty soon. Some people up here may get meeting fatigue. Yes, Rick?
And I feel like I've said what I had to say. I think that, like I said initially, what I read, what I reviewed in preparation for this is pretty straightforward. I think we delineated a few, improvements or some thoughtful comments and different ways of looking at things and so forth. So I feel like I'm good with it for now.
Same. Well, I concur. So thank you, everybody. And this meeting, staff has a comment. I was so close to adjourning. I'm going to hold this up. Zach, what do you got to say, sir?
Not to delay the adjournment, but just real quickly, just wanted to wrap up and share my screen and just highlight next steps. So viewers that are still with us or in the committee, we know where we're going from here. Sorry, 1 second there.
Well, while you're digging that out, I will, to the extent there is any public viewing, I think it was page 4 of the packet, and it's also in the material. Maybe it's what you're coming up here. And we've got a whole bunch of workshops and English and in Spanish, open houses. These events are a real opportunity for people to weigh in on all this subject matter. Go, Zach.
There we go. Couldn't get through this meeting without one little technical confusion. So let me go ahead and get to the end of the slideshow here. And so I just wanted to wrap up real quickly. Note our next meeting will actually be a little over a week and a half away. It will be on Tuesday, August 30th, and it will cover the land use and circulation elements, and that will be the final GPS meeting for this series. I'm just re-highlighting opportunities for community input and would definitely encourage residents and interested members of the public to visit our website, strivesanmateo.org. We do have an online survey to weigh in on the draft goals, policies, and actions for all of the general plan elements. And then we do have 2 planning commission meetings coming up on September 13th and the 27th, and then we'll be going to council in October. So thank you for all your input here tonight, and we look forward to continuing this discussion both with the GPS and with the community at large.
Excellent. Thank you, committee members. Thank you, staff, for putting up with us. And onward. We're adjourned.